out of bed.
It's worth it. Now, just remember, guys, you can put your questions in the chat for Drew, our special guest. We're going to roll into the intro and hear from Sandy in a minute, and then roll into Drew. So if you've got any questions, don't forget to type them in. And we're going to be stopping and asking questions from the bunch as well.
How are the legs after then too? Ask Daniela, how are the legs? It's the heart. But the heart the size of a split pea, Daniela. I got up there though.
Sandy, you said that. You said that yesterday, Sandy, and I just wanted to just give you a little bit of feedback. If you're up for the feedback, we used to say to athletes who would suggest those things about themselves, it's all in your head, mate. It's all in your head.
That's true. We've got the brain the size of a split pea as well.
Double whammy. Oh, got no chance.
Away we go, Duncan.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Telstra Connected Cycling and Podcast. It's great to see everybody in their paint caves or on the beach, bush track, or neighbourhood streets walking, like the great Charles Lynch, who's been doing that for the last 6-7 weeks. Or you could be joining us from your homes and getting your day started in an inspiring way. We are so thrilled to have our numbers growing each week as news goes out about our workout and our chat with inspirational Aussies. This is week 16 of developing this series, and our steering committee of Sandy Woolley, Diane Hannon, Kurt Houston, Anna Mallon and John Pitchinen are delighted that everyone is finding it's making a real impact on their week and their outlook in their lives. So the Telstra Connected Cycling's motto is connecting people and technology through the passion of cycling. And with that stated, here's our ride director, Mr. Passion himself, post Von 2, Sandy Woolley.
Thanks, Duncan, and a big welcome to all our regular riders and new riders like Blair Hasford. So welcome, Blair, and anyone else who's new to our weekly events. I hope you really enjoy it. I'm sure you will. You'll notice today, unlike all other weeks, where I wear my Telstra Connected Cycling jerseys, available to anyone, just ask for the link. I'm actually wearing the Amy Gillett Foundation kit today. Yesterday marked 15 years since Amy Gillett died, and obviously the Amy Gillett Foundation was set up to make our roads safer for all cyclists, where I think on average a cyclist is killed every 10 days. So we heard from Stephen Hodge the other week and the work he's doing, so too is Amy Gillett Foundation. For those of you who are not in the game, and this is your first time, you're wondering what the hell we're all doing and why I'm puffing. I'm in the game of Zwift. If you scroll through your screen, you'll actually find one which actually shows the game. We're all riding together. So you can check that out if you're wondering why we're all puffing. But again, looking forward to a great chat this morning with Drew Ginn. And back to you, Duncan. Look forward to it.
Thanks very much, Sandy. Now, as always, if you have a question for our special guest Drew, please send it through on the messages board and we'll get to it during the podcast. So let me introduce our guest today, Drew Ginn, OAM. Now, we have many sporting champions in Australia to be recognised, so to be recognised as being one of the unique variety of multi-sport champions is rare. But that's exactly what Drew is, rare. One of those rare breeds of uber champions in a couple of sports. So Drew is a 5-time world champion rower, a 4-time Olympian for Australia, with an amazing 3 gold medals and 1 silver medal for his efforts at the 5-ring circus. So that's incredible. And Drew has also been named World Rower of the Year 2 times and presented with the biggest prize in the world of rowing, which is the Thomas Keller Medal for his achievements in the sport. He's one of only 5 Aussies to have won it. After all his legendary exploits in the green and gold for Australia on the water in 2009, Drew switched to cycling. Yes, that's right. He's greedy. Success came quickly on the bike with victory in the Oceania Time Trial Champs and a top 6 finish in the Australian Road Race Championship. So like I said, very greedy, very unpopular. Please welcome Drew to the Telstra Connected Cycling podcast and to tell us about these amazing feats and what he's doing now as the ED of high performance at Australian cricket. So welcome, Drew. What an intro at this early in the morning.
I'm going to go back to bed now. I'm tired. You've worn me out, mate.
Yes.
And well, embarrassingly so.
Yeah, but it is a fantastic career, and it's not until you sort of dig right into it that you could see the length and breadth of your success in the boat. for Australia, but it wasn't always that way. You came to it in high school at Scotch College in Melbourne. You're a country boy, but you went to boarding school in Melbourne, and that's where the fuse was lit.
Yeah, mate, it was. We're 2 hours out of Melbourne, so we're on the farm down here in Cape Patterson, or Cape Patterson, South Gippsland. And I grew up in a little town called Inverloch and used to ride from the BMX track to the surf beach. And that's about 10 Ks if anyone's visited Inverloch. And you had sort of 4 or 5 of our good friends, and we all rode our bikes, did our skateboarding, did our surfing. So my mum passed away when I was 11, and my dad decided a bit of a promise to her was to get me a good education, and so sent me to boarding school in Melbourne, completely out of my depths. And then a maths teacher, Brad McLeod, grabbed me one day and said, why don't you give this sport rowing a go? And I think I sort of must have said something back to him like, rowing's for meatheads or something like that. And he took me down like any good person who cares, great teachers who care, put me in the boat, gave me some simple instructions, and I didn't listen to one instruction whatsoever. And within 15 minutes, I was swimming. And the Yarra is not particularly pleasant. So, and what I should have listened to was how to get back in the boat, because that was the hardest part. I had to swim the boat back to shore.
So you're standing there wringing wet. But that's sometimes what it takes, isn't it? It sometimes takes a mentor that sees more in you than you see in yourself to really light a flame or put you in a situation that basically starts you on a whole journey. It's those mentors.
Oh, mate, and I think that's the one as being an athlete, and I think any of us sort of appreciate that someone seeing something in you that gives you confidence when you're young and potentially you're self-conscious and you're trying to think through your life and all that sort of stuff, particularly as a young teenager. So to have Bram do that, to then have other coaches like Laurie Malcolm, James Tompkins at school, because he was coaching me in the final year at school. So to have teachers like that and then have coaches like that see something in you was quite extraordinary. And so I remember Paul McGann, who was the head coach at school, and I heard him make an off-the-cuff comment, and I found out many years ago he did this deliberately. He didn't want to say these things directly to an athlete because he thought that would be putting pressure on. But what he liked doing was talking about the young athlete that he thought was very talented or had a potential to change. And so he referenced and said, Drew could be like the awesome foursome. And I was just in earshot. And I remember hearing that, and it just made me sort of feel proud and more capable. So I found out many years ago over a beer with him, he said he used to do those sort of tricks with the young athletes all the time just to give them a bit of a boost up, a bit of pep up. And so it's a powerful thing that mentors and coaches can do.
Yeah, no, and speaking to a teenager's intuition is the way to get him to do anything. So you're a victim of being a teenager and your intuition. So I've asked this of many guests on the podcast over the last 15, 16 weeks, but can you describe what it is about rowing that actually made complete sense to you?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the very first time I was in the boat, in an 8. So I had a single scull row, fell in, so that was disastrous, but there was a challenge in that. And so I'd always loved water sports. And so I think 2 days later, I was up the back end of the boat, the very last seat, which is the first seat across the finish line. Interesting about rowing the bow over all those years. Get to celebrate before everyone else. But I sat in this seat, and there's 7 young athletes in front of me, and I didn't know any of them. There's a coxswain who was in charge of steering the boat and command, a coach sitting in a speedboat. So that was really overwhelming. And being on the water was nice. So being in Melbourne was always uncomfortable because I missed the ocean, missed the coastline and all that sort of stuff. So then being on the water in Melbourne was nice. But the other one that really resonated with me that was so different to any other sport I'd ever done was this person in front of me, and I don't even remember his name, turned around and gave me advice about what to do with my blade and how to time it with the crew and all that sort of stuff. And so here's a peer. And so the thing that I first was confronted by was just the sheer nature of your team. You're only as good as every team member in the boat. So you help your team and you get intimate with your team and you do what you can to make sure that they're on board and you can all match up and do it together. So that early experience was so similar to the foursome and all the Olympic experiences, which is that connection you've got with that one other person. And you do anything you can to help them feel comfortable in the boat, and they're doing anything they can to help you feel comfortable. And you connect, and that's how you make the boat work. So it's not the physicality; it's actually the connection and the relationship you have.
Well, as a spectator, I should say, like the rowing lake's 2 miles long or 2 kilometres long. So you have this real disconnect from the crowd, And so you really have that relationship, and that's it, isn't it? It's almost like you're in this bubble in the middle of this large lake, and really the two of you or the four of you or the eight of you is all you've got. Can you describe to us what it's like being in that boat when things are going really well, when you're in the flow or in that zone, and everything you've ever hoping is happening in the moment? Can you describe for us what's that like? Because most of us are not going to feel that.
Yeah, I probably there's a couple of things I can put it in perspective with. I think and I'll use the Olympic Games as an example in '96, and I'll share something about Beijing. So I remember getting on the water, and the guys had shared a story about '92 Barcelona, which was paddling down to the start line and getting away from where the crowd was and all that sort of stuff, and it all just goes quiet. So eventually what you get confronted with is not crowds or an overwhelming sense of performing in front of others, but all of a sudden this fearful thing of it's only you, and it's only you and your team. And so they're doing a warm-up, and the thing they described was their heart rates, feeling like they were going through the roof. And it's a perception of heart rate, because the heart rate's probably not as high, but it's that feeling of adrenaline. And they shared that with me. So in '96, I remember we're paddling up to the start, and it's getting quieter and quieter as you get away from where the boating area is. And there's lots of athletes. There's a crowd of 15,000 people on one side, 5,000 on the other. And as you're getting up to the 1,000-metre mark, that noise is really dimmed right down. And next thing you know, you're just out in the middle of a lake in Lake Lanier. And there's no one there. Like you could be anywhere in the world. And so that what you get confronted by is that real sense of you are in this with your team, and you are in this with yourself. And so it can be isolating, but it can be a really great sense of just being centered. So in '96, I really enjoyed the ability to sit on the start line and sort of go, well, you're thinking about the finish, and your mind starts to rush, and you're thinking about, say, where you've come from, and again, the mind starts to speed up, and all of a sudden I used to just put my hand in the water, or hold my oar handle, or just make sure things are tight on the boat, and you do the final couple of checks, and that brought me right back into the moment. And even little things like wiggling my feet in my toes and my shoes. And so simple things like that. And the Beijing connection here is quirky things happen, strange things happen when you're right in the moment that you see that don't then stress you, but they're just weird things. So we've paddled onto the start line in Beijing, and the South Africans were directly behind us, and I had a back injury. And you were limping through the whole week, and so you were stressed by that, and that had me just whizzing massively to think how we're going to get through this final. And we paddled around, and all of a sudden Duncan's in front of me, and he's 200 centimetres tall, 100 kilograms, so he's huge. And his shoulders start to go up and down, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, what's going on here? Like, this is extraordinary, because he's a big body, and so when he does that, the ripples of the boat go out and all that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden he's turned and he's spewed over the side of the boat. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got a stuffed back. He's being ill, so he's obviously got food poisoning is the first assumption I've made. And he's turned around to me and goes, no, that's all right, just a bit nervous, Now, what we didn't know was the South Africans are paddling in behind us, and we'd had a cooling routine, and one of the cooling strategies was slushy beforehand, as well as an ice bath. So you jump in 10 degrees water, you're in there for about 6 minutes, you lower your temperature down. The slushy was 600 mils, but it was a certain colour. Now, it's got no sugar in it, but it was red. And so he's consumed this slushy and consumed a little bit too much. So what came out of him was red slushy into the water. Well, the South Africans had seen that. They thought he was actually dying. But in all this, you paddle onto the start line, and this is about being in the moment, is all of a sudden you're sitting there, and I wasn't thinking about the finish line anymore, wasn't thinking about dunks, wasn't thinking about my back. And this little head pops up in the water, and it's one of the frogmen who were clearing weeds from the boat. And he just had this calm look on his face, just appeared above the water, held up the weeds, and just looked at us and just went, just put it to the side. And you just had this moment of just being right there. And it was almost like you're looking and connecting. And then I looked at dunks, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, like, it's great just to be in that moment, rather than worried about all the other stuff.
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to, these sort of moments where you recenter, reground, and then it becomes, just another boat race. But that couldn't have been like that in '96 when you first started with the Awesome Foursome, because they're already reigning Olympic champs. Andrew Cooper retires. You've had some fantastic early success with victories in the King's Cup and high school this and under 23 that. And, you are the man for the moment to fill that seat, but they're big shoes on that boat. And these guys are already famous. They're doing fruit ads, they're doing bread ads, they're doing all these ads. They are the Awesome Foursome. And you little, I shouldn't call you little, but young Drew Ginn jumps into that big seat You must have been feeling the pressure of that whole bubble. And I know you had your sort of like reality bits where you're touching this and tightening your shoes and looking at these guys. And then you're with Tompkins and Green and Mackay. And these guys are guns. Like, they've been to every boat race in the world. They've won it all. They've done it all. And they're just holding you. But you must have been overwhelmed at some stage sitting in that boat without the crowd noise, getting ready to go, start.
You've made me nervous just talking about it, mate. I'm just going to reach across here. See this? This is a can of fruit.
SPC.
How do I describe it? Overwhelmed, definitely. What I found was I was most overwhelmed 2 days out from the final. Couldn't sleep. Rooming with James was a deliberate tactic Noel Donaldson had, was to give me the person who was probably the most calm in the crew and the most confident and reassuring in the crew. And they split Mike and Nick. And the reason why they split Mike and Nick was because Mike was very intense, a real driver, but that meant that he would sometimes stress others around him. And so having a young athlete like me with him wasn't going to work. But James was fantastic. And so what I found was he'd go to sleep very early in the room, in the little college room in the dorm. And I'd be sitting there going, how the heck is he doing this? So all I can tell you is being around people that had been there before was overwhelming. But being around them because they'd been there before was also very calming because it had that influence. So I got to do this is funny, I got to do a fruit commercial before I was a gold medalist, right? So let's put that in perspective. So you're standing in a human can, with Nick Green and Mike Mackay. James is at the front doing the singing, and I'm ducking down thinking to myself, what the heck am I doing here? These guys are gold medalists. So I was out of my comfort zone, I reckon, for a full 12 months.
Before you move on, can we just get a couple of lines from that fruit ad? Can you just sing it to us?
Golden belly gold, luscious fruits now exotic.
Belly gold. Did you have to get your voice all the way down there? Gold.
Luscious fruits now exotic.
Oh, you've still got the head bobble. I love that. It was very, it was awesome.
Peaches and apricot and pineapple.
Yeah, you were the pineapple.
It's too early,
mate.
Jesus.
Very deep, mate. Thank you, mate. So you're on the line at E96, Lake Lanier.
Yeah, I think what I tried to do was the only thing I knew, which was simply remind myself of races that I'd had where I felt had gone well. And so what I tried to get in my head was an image of a race which was a national championships kind of race. So a level that I felt confident at and a level I didn't feel as overwhelmed at. So I just remember thinking, this is just like the state champs. And this is just like the King's Cup, and this is like being at the head of the river as a school kid. And so rather than being at the Olympic Games, I tried to sort of get myself into that sort of headspace. And I remember sort of vividly sort of realising that I had James, Nick and Mike sitting in front of me, and it was like, bloody hell, this is pretty cool to have the awesome foursome in your boat. But then I sort of tried to get myself to come back to go, hold it, it's just another boat race, And so for me, the guys always talked about one stroke at a time, and it's a simple thing to say, but much harder to do. But I really tried to not let the emotions get too much of me. I think I was given the opportunity to call the race plan as well. So that gave me a sense of purpose and responsibility rather than just sitting in the boat. But when you look at who's in your crew and then you look at who's in all the other crews, every time I did that, I'd find I'd get stressed. So that was an intuitive thing, was to do those little reminders of everything's tight, everything's fixed, and, I'm just having another race. And by doing that sort of set me up well, I think.
Have we lost you, Duncan?
I think Dunk's so excited he's gone out for a ride.
We've lost him.
I'll just have a look. Give us a second.
You can see some of the workout faces going on here. It's extraordinary. John Darcy hasn't broken a sweat yet. I think you should work harder, Darcy.
No, I'm just cruising at the moment. In between sets, Drew.
That Rafa shirt should be dripping in sweat, I think.
I've got the deluxe fan down to my left, so I'm pretty well set up here in the man cave. Here we go. 400 watts now. That's 2 watts above your FTP.
400 watts.
Sorry, guys. I'm only in the Telstra building and I was disconnected. Fantastic. But okay, so where do we get up to? We get up to Lake Lanier and you're getting ready for the boat, mate. Without hearing what you just said, can I ask you what it meant to you to be an Olympian?
Very good question. I didn't think you were going to ask that kind of question. What it meant to be an Olympian. I'll give two responses to this. One, I'll try to remember what it was like being told that I was going to go to the Olympic Games. You know, so you're not an Olympian, but you've just been told. The most proud moment ever, you know, because I think as a young kid, all you aspired to doing from very early memories of, say, 10, 11 years of age, watching the games on TV was, you know, dreaming of a possibility like that in your life, but never really thinking it was actually going to ever transpire. You see those things on TV, you see those things in the news for other people. So to be told, you know, you're joining the awesome foursome and, you know, you've now been selected in the Australian four to go and represent your country was just unbelievable. I remember walking out of the selection meeting and James and Mike turned around and sort of said, yeah, finally we nailed it. And it was a really rigorous selection process. They kept asking us to come back. And so I think they were a bit annoyed at the establishment, but also proud that they'd finally got given the nod as well. And I was sort of finding myself just in there going, this is unbelievable. Can't imagine what it's going to be like. And then you have this sort of thought of going, I think at the time I was 19 years of age. And then you're sort of realizing that for 8 years at least, you've been dreaming about it and never think it is possible. Now that I've gone through what I've gone through, I look back, one great memory is that, but every so often when I really think about what it means to be an Olympian, it's a responsibility, I think, as an athlete to know that you've given the best of yourself and know that you've been a part of a community that hopefully has been inspired and then gets a chance to do the inspiring and then show that there's more to sport than just the result. You know, it's about how you live and it's about how you carried yourself as an athlete, but also how you can sort of share the Olympic story so that it's actually relevant for others who aren't necessarily Olympians but can live the principles and focus on getting the best out of themselves. So I think that's the responsibility.
So contrast that, the pride that you're feeling and everything like that, contrast that with standing up there at Lake Lanier with the gold medal. But you've done the job, you've entered the boat, you're with legends. Now you're part of their story as well, going forward. You're a reigning Olympic champion and no one can take that gold medal off you. So contrast for everybody what it feels like, the difference it feels like between becoming an Olympian and then becoming an Olympic gold medalist. Have you got words for that? I probably found myself without words, to be fair. I remember standing there. Actually, let's go back one step. Crossing the finish line, and as I joked before about celebrating moments before, I've seen the footage, so I know that I had my hands off the oars before we hit the finish line. We won by 0.6 of a second, right? So 0.6 of a second is effectively my arm span, 2 meters. We crossed the finish line. I was waving hysterically, just going, I can't believe this has just happened. So you're just that kid, right? And then I grabbed James back into my lap and I told him that I loved him. and he's sort of sitting there saying, that's great, young fella, that's great, get away from me. But the thing was, above all that, and this is the thing I do recall is, because it's not one moment, right? So it's just a series of things that just sort of come together as a thread. And so then I hear, Nick Green stood in the boat. Mike Mackay turned around and had this real sort of physical, sort of intense look on his face, like we did this and we drove it and all that sort of stuff. So everyone had their different emotions based on personality. But then when the crowd noise was just subduing ever so slightly, and that's the wonderful thing about the games, being in an outdoor sport, Duncan, the wonderful thing about being in the game is when the crowd's there, it's not quite like in some of the stadiums where it's really close, so it's a little bit further removed. But my dad's in the grandstand. I can hear him calling out my nickname as a kid. And so it was that thing of that surreal uplift of, you're an Olympian, you're now a gold medalist, you can't believe it. And then all of a sudden you get this reminder that you are still just the kid in the sun. And then we're standing there on the dais and they put the medal over your neck. And I remember just looking down at this thing going, this is mine. I've got this. Like this is, and I'd never seen one before. I'd never touched one before. I'd never even come close. So that first moment was just like an hour, 2 hours. Felt like I was just holding it. And then James nudged me and goes, "Now make sure we sing the national anthem well, right?" And I'm going, "Oh, okay. So let's get this right." And we completely butchered it. So the reality is, it's not perfect. It's all these little things that happen in the experience, and so.
For me, it was grounding. It was surreal. It took a long time to really get in perspective, that first games, because I think, the reality is it's like a bit of a circus and you don't fully comprehend it. Mike said a really great comment, which was, it's really important the next 24, 48 hours to just slow down, absorb it all, just get your moments that you need. And he needed to get away individually, and he went and watched a movie that night. It was actually bizarre. James went and wanted to hang out with people and, celebrate and all that sort of stuff. And so I was a bit sort of in between that sort of stuff. So just going for a walk by yourself, just to let it sort of flow over you, and then all of a sudden with people that you're celebrating with. And so for me, it took a long time to really embed and become clear about what it all really meant, because it wasn't about the result. It was about the experience you'd had with these guys, so that was the thing that really stood out, and the experience of dreaming about it for 8 years, so unique, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing way you tell that story, and as you're telling it, actually I can see it on TV, because we're at the village with the broadcasters and stuff, and we all watched it, and seeing you guys butcher that national anthem was because you're such big guys. You're such big guys. You're blowing out from the rowing. You're strong. You're probably at your peak, and then you have to try to sort of do something artistic. It's very funny, but again, it's a lasting memory. So that's 96, and that is the fairy tale for any young person coming into a boat like that, with those amazing personalities surrounding you, each teaching you from their drive and passion and stuff like that. But then Sydney comes along, and you get a disc issue in your back, and you're hyper competition. You're working with James in the pairs, and so again you've got this legend on his path. You're on your path. You're going to your home Olympic Games. Everything's building up, and yet you've got a back injury that just will not allow you to get in the game. What was that like? That must have been a nightmare. From fairy tale to nightmare almost. Yeah,
hardest thing as an athlete, I think, is when things become out of your control, and I say out of your control being you're injured, you're not able to perform properly, you're trying, nothing's working, all that sort of stuff. And so, and home Olympic Games really added a significant amount of gravitas to that, because all of a sudden all the athletes and everyone, all media have been talking about home Olympic Games, and it's the most important thing and greatest thing to be a part of. So I think what I recognised in myself, and you mentioned competitiveness. So yes, I'm highly competitive, and I think most athletes are. I actually find that most people are competitive. It's just that we learn to turn it off, or we learn to dull it a little bit and all that sort of stuff. We were successful the year before the Olympic Games in St. Catharines, Canada, and James and I rode a race in a certain way that put us way out in front of the field. And I remember at the time going, well, that's about as good as I can ever recall ever rowing, training, competition, whatever it is. And I'm rowing with a hero of mine, and we're in a pair that's working really, really well, really fast. And you cross the finish line and you go, geez, how are you going to do that again? Like, how do you duplicate that? And so the opposite to being in flow was being out of flow, was starting to look back in on those moments and sort of thinking, how do you get in there? How do you get in there? And so that was a bit of a mental game. So to have that success then, to get injured in the gym, and anyone who's ever had an injury, sometimes it happens to you, sometimes you've actually brought it upon yourself. So what I struggled with in 2000 was I got injured in the gym egotistically, being too competitive, and not wanting to acknowledge that I wasn't in great physical shape at the start of the training year. And so you have 4 weeks off. I'm under a squat rack, ridiculous size weight, going up because my peers, Rob Walker and Richard Wern, were competitive, and I didn't want to appear like I couldn't lift it. So I get under, and next thing you know, I get this twinge in my back. But that took me months to realise that I caused that to myself. So what I realised in 2000 was hardest thing to stand on the sidelines watching an event that you've been a part of, watching your teammate row with Matthew Long, reserve, really good friend of mine. So proud for them, but envious that you're missing out. But then getting my head around the idea going, actually, I did this to myself, and so once I started realising that I'd caused the issue, and likewise, you're the one that can actually get yourself into a better flexion position as well. And so for me, it was hard to be injured, hard to watch the games, but it's actually the thing that shaped me better for the rest of my career, I think. So I got to enjoy some parties in Sydney, which were nice, as an athlete. So I took the silver lining from it.
Yeah, exactly. You got the business done at the wrong end. Hey, listen, so that was Sydney, but then you and James, matched up again, teamed up again for the pairs, and there was gold in Athens, which must have been an amazing thrill to be at the home of the Olympic Games and take on the best. And you scared the legendary British duo of Matthew Pinsent and James Cracknell into the coxless fall. They went well. They went 4 back-to-back, so we're not feeling too sorry for them. But you were dominating. You did really an amazing amount of lead-up races. You got in there, won in Athens. You then teamed up with Big Duncan Free, got to Beijing in 2008, then went further into London, 2012, and you're in the Coxless 4 this time. You're back in the 4-man boat, and you got bronze behind this unbelievably tough British crew on their home ground. So that was always going to be tough. So when you look back at your career and you go, World Championships since 1998, 5 gold, 1 silver, 2 bronze. Incredible. When you look back at the length and breadth of your career, and I know we're skating it forward because we need to get to your cycling, what do you take out of that? Because you have such a long period of winning, such a long period of success. You're using buzzwords today like he's the driver, he's the creator, he's this, he's that. This was all forming up. This was all happening in sport as you came through in such a long and beautiful career. What do you take from it?
Firstly, the way you describe it, it's inaccurate, and that's the interesting part, because what we all describe, and I reflect the same way. I think about the successes, and so when you look at the successes in a linear line, it's really easy to enjoy that story. The problem with that is the reality was I had lots of times where we weren't successful, and lots of times where you're either broken down physically or it wasn't working, or that sort of stuff. So the highs and lows are quite critical. So for me, it's the roller coaster I think we all need to be aware of. The other one, when I look back, probably my reflection is, how do you keep results going forward in an international event where things are getting faster? So the Brits knew this as well. You had to keep reinventing yourself, and you had to keep either refreshing the crew in some way in terms of new personnel coming in, trying something different with a new bit of equipment, either a boat, an oar, a blade, a training methodology, changing coaches sometimes. So changing athletes for changing coaches. So when you look from the start to the end, I was rowing with completely different athletes, and philosophically we were trying lots of different things in training we never did back in 96. And I'll put in perspective. So in 96 we rowed, we thought we could row about 5 minutes 48 seconds, and the world record at that time was 47. We won the Olympic Games doing that sort of performance. And so you look at that and you go, but in 2012 we rowed 5 minutes 41 in a heat in Lucerne, Switzerland, 8 weeks after the Olympic Games, breaking it down over the last 1,000 metres. So those athletes in 2012, I don't think were perceived as being the calibre like the Awesome Foursome, but we'd upgraded, we'd understood the process and the recipe. Technology was getting better. We were chasing standards that were higher. So for me, it's an up and down. What I thought was really important in terms of the reflection is you reflect when you succeed to really understand what's made you successful, and you reflect when it's going badly. So the bad one's easy because their back's against the wall. But often people do this intense reflection when things aren't going well, and sometimes that turns them around. But when they have this high point, they often sort of go, oh, I'll just keep rolling forward. But that means you've got a flat line, up and down, versus how do you go up? So if the standard's always moving, my thing was, how do you keep putting enough pressure on yourself and the crew, reflect at the top, reflect at the bottom, keep the standards going up? And so I look back now and laugh and go, you were in it, and you were just thinking about constantly how could you improve. But it wasn't because you were going well all the time. It was because you had lots of times where it wasn't going well. So the highs and lows were the real part of it, rather than just the icing on the cake.
So basically, when we were successful, we party and don't learn as much. But when, like you said, backs against the wall, when you get a defeat, and you get very creative in terms of not happening. So you're saying you got those two lines, those two areas or states closer together for continuous improvement. So then comes retirement. Always hard for an athlete, especially someone who's done so much winning and losing. See, I've already learned something. So it's always difficult, but the bike has always been part of it, huh? The bike has always been part of your training, and even back in the day when you're in your hometown, pedaling to the surf for a surf, the bike has always been part of your life.
Mate, I raced BMX bikes as a kid. It was my first foray into a competitive sport. The parents in the local community built a BMX track, 5 or 6 kids ranging different ages. You'd ride a BMX, as I said before, from one side of the town where my nana lives to the surf, which is 10 Ks, and you'd ride back. We had fixed gear bikes as well for the track in Leongatha, so velodrome over there, up there. And so I remember being on a fixed gear bike, velodrome track bike, barefoot on the cleats and pedals at the time, so little straps, board under the arm, wind blowing everywhere. A mate ahead of me riding the exact same bike. We'd ride out the coast here to get a surf, but we wanted to wear our wetsuits. And because we didn't trust leaving our shoes in car parks and all that sort of stuff, so we used to just go in bare feet. So riding was always a part of how we got around, and it was a part of the competitive spirit. To transition into rowing as a young athlete, I remember going to school and sort of riding became a physical part of the conditioning and volume work that we used. And then when I got injured, it became even more important. So all of a sudden, the volume that you get on the bike was so helpful. So to do a training session on the bike in the afternoon and to do a row in the morning was the way I balanced out my back issues. And James was up for it, and others who I rode with. And then to go as an athlete where you go, well, can I have a crack at doing another sport? Cycling just seemed to be the natural sport that I really enjoyed and had an affinity with. I was probably just too big in terms of many respects of that sort of stuff. So good power numbers in the lab, they always said, but not overly aero. But it was always a part of my life, always a part of the training. And it's a thing I can see myself now doing until I die, until I pass away. You know, I can see it being the activity I do for life.
You are a Zwift junkie. Hey, listen, what about, so when I read about your cycling career, because let's call it a cycling career, because, you know, you took all that scientific knowledge, you took all that emotional knowledge that you'd got out of the boat, out of those years of rowing, out of that big time competition at the Olympic Games and World Championships, and you brought it into cycling and you really worked on your stats, and you went in the Oceania time trial, you won that. How was your experience in the Australian road race? Because this is the fascinating side of your story. Like, don't get me wrong, I love all the golds. I love all your crappy national anthem singing. I love all that. I do. But when we're looking at the transition, I find this the most complicated part of your story, the transition from rowing into cycling and being the size that you are at 6'4" and a bit, getting on a bike, tuning the bike up, getting that knowledge from your coaches and mentors like you're so good at finding, and then getting on the bike and making a difference and making an impact on an already established, well-established sport. That's impressive. How'd you do it?
Good question. I probably found myself being more confident as an athlete by that stage. So the ability to go and seek out people at the Victorian Institute of Sport. So Dave Saunders was the first one, the cycling coach. And I'm pretty sure when I sort of asked him some questions about cycling, he was going, what's this bloody roller thinking he's about? But I'd already done a bit of research and I already knew some information about myself physiologically, not just from rowing, but also the cycling and rowing. And I was an avid learner in a lot of sports, you know, where you're always trying to unearth and understand, you know, how athletes achieve. So then Dave Saunders, I think, when you know, you're being a nuisance, I'll put you onto someone else who was John O'Hall, who was the triathlon coach. And then Oceanias was interesting because then John O rang Scott McGrory, who you know very, very well, and Scott, an Olympian and gold medalist in Sydney. So I was flown across to New Zealand, only with a bike, and John O said, don't worry, Scott will be at the other end, he'll help you get sorted for your time trial and all that sort of stuff. I want to put the Oceanias in perspective, though. So for all of you who are listening, a young Michael Matthews rode on that particular day, and I'd raced Michael Matthews a few times that year. So I was a much older athlete. He was a fresh kid coming out of Canberra. Really great talent. And in the Oceanias, I won the open race and did very well in what was some of the windiest conditions ever, where you're on the bike sideways and you're blowing across the road, and Scott tooting behind me every time I get close to the edge of the road to say, get upwind, get upwind. Michael Matthews rode 2.5 minutes quicker than me on that particular day. So while I won an Oceania title, I was very passionate about the cycling. I think the difference in just standards was immense. So full credit to those guys. I'll give you some stats that help make sense of this. I'm 6'5" and I was 88 kilograms at the start. By the time I raced time trial at Nationals 2 years later, I was 78 kilograms. Still 6'5". My power numbers were really interesting. So when I first started having a crack, I was getting around sort of 400 watts for an hour, which at 88, you know, not bad power to weight ratio, but not great. By the end, I was doing 449 watts for 78 kilograms. So, and that still had me getting beaten by these guys by a minute and a half in an hour time trial. So to put it in perspective, when you look at the cycling level, I had physical attributes, But these guys go to a whole nother level. Their power to weight are immense. Their aerodynamicness is crazy. And they've been cycling all their lives. So while I'd been cycling as a hobbyist and loving it, and so great learning, the ability to transition was something I loved doing, but I would never claim that I transitioned to being a cyclist. I claim to transition to trying to be a cyclist.
Well, once you win a title, the transition's complete.
That's right.
Hey, listen, the charity, all of us on the ride, so many of us on the ride have been part of the wonderful Tour de Cure community. Jeff Coombs and these guys have done an amazing job over the last 13, 14 years, raising millions of dollars, like over $60 million for the cancer community and funding research and funding research. You got into this market, didn't you? So what does that do for you in terms of your cycling, being surrounded by passionate cyclists like yourself, doing something extraordinary? We want to get onto the 24-hour effort of 840, I'm trying to rip you off, sorry, 840 kilometres in the 24 hours. So what does that do for you, Tour de Cure and those guys?
Oh, I love Tour de Cure. I love persistence Jeff Coombs and the group's had for many, many years. Jeff rang me probably for 4 or 5 years in a row, and every time they were having a tour on, you're either overseas or just getting back from overseas and you didn't feel like going away from your family. He kept persisting and got Nick Green involved one year, others involved. To then hear the story about how they've built that organisation, that charity up, and the amount of money they've raised, as you say, $60 million, over $60 million now. So it's a real point of passion. I lost my mum to cancer when I was a young kid, as I said before. My dad recently lost to cancer 3 months ago as well. And so really important to make a difference, I've always felt. And so using, I suppose, your athlete skills and your knowledge and your network and all that sort of stuff to get involved, and to work out how you can actually raise money or be involved in some way to help influence and show that you're there to support them. But every single person, this is the thing about Tour de Cure, every single person has a story, either their own cancer story, survivors, or story and survivor stories of family and friends and all that sort of stuff. So what you realise is this disease touches so many people. And so while it's personal to me, it's one of those things. I think what they've done as an organisation is just outstanding. And they use, I think, just one of the great healthy pursuits that is so social, which is cycling. And even what we're doing here today, it just brings people together, which means that you're doing it for a good cause, but you're also keeping healthy yourself.
Absolutely. Hey, so get on to the 24-hour effort. Where did the genesis for this idea come from? So let's break it down. 24 hours on a bike, seeing how far you can get, raising money for a great cause, and just torturing yourself into the tarmac.
Yep.
Oh, okay, so that's good answer. Thanks very much for that. Okay, moving on.
How do I put it in perspective?
How do you even train for it? How do you even train for it?
Yeah, you don't. Well, you start out small, I think is the reality. And again, go back to the bit of the message before. So a guy called Andy Pike was leading Rafa in Australia. And, those who know the Rafa cycling kit and all that sort of stuff, he invited me to a bike ride one day. And I then rang a couple of friends and we went out for a ride. And then as we were doing this ride, we started realising this guy and some of the people he was associated with didn't just do rides for corporates. They actually did adventures for themselves as well. And so these adventures would be all day long. So bit by bit, you started getting into longer rides. And then I met this guy called Jesse Carlson, who did the Race Across America. And in the endurance cycling circles, Jesse's very, very famous in Australia with Sarah Hammond. And I'm on this ride up to Albury-Wodonga, and it's over 2 days, 3 days. And all of a sudden, Jesse's sidled up next to me at one sort of stage. And he goes, "So you're the rower?" I went, yep. And he goes, starts asking questions about rowing, and he showed a real interest. And all of a sudden, he led on that he was a BMX racer as a young kid. And then we realised that we were about a year or two apart, but we'd have probably raced at a lot of the same competitions. So that was fascinating. And all of a sudden, Jesse turned around and said, "You ever thought of riding really long?" And I'm going, what do you mean riding really long? He goes, like 2 days, 3 days, just go on your bike and just go. And I'm going, nah. So it just blew my mind the way this guy thought about it. And then I started finding out from the guys on the ride that what he would do is he'd head out on a Friday night, he'd ride all weekend, sleep over at certain spots and then come back. And so it became inspirational just as to someone being an adventurer and someone exploring. And then I had Alan Kawani, who was a former Australian cyclist, on the ride by the end of it. So this is all within 2 days, turn around and say, "Drew, I reckon you've got to have a crack at the 24-hour. And so for me, having some people see something in you, and I was like, oh, okay. And they kept hounding me and they kept talking about when are you going to set a date and when are you going to do this and when are you going to have a crack. So it started small. It started with suggestions by others. I started sort of going out on 3, 4, 5 hour rides, out to 7 hour rides, 10 hour rides. I had to test myself first and trying to work out my fuel and all that sort of stuff. And it becomes a bit of a solo existence because no one else wants to ride beyond 10 hours generally. But I did find some friends who would happily join me on a lap down to, say, Portsea. First lap, and then another group of friends would join me on a second lap down to Portsea. And so, but you wouldn't do that all the time. You do that every second weekend. And so you build up over the course of 2 weeks to have a really big ride, physically expend all that energy. And then as you got confident, I started then sort of saying, well, maybe I could have a crack at this 24 hours. Maybe it's not just talk and banter. And then we set a date. And once we set a date, it was like, shit, I'm on the line here, right? I've got to do it now. And then I made the call, which is I rang Jeff and said, I want to do this for Tour de Cure. And then I realised that I put myself in it because not only had I set a date, I had to then work out the track. Brunswick Velodrome was the lumpiest track ever. I then agreed to raising funds for Tour de Cure. And amazingly, we raised $48,000 out of the event. Started midday, finished midday the next day. Lots of people turned out at the course. And so it wasn't even about really having a crack at the record, but we talked about that. It was more just about just the experience of seeing how far we could actually go and what would be involved and if we could make a difference for Tour de Cure. So started small, it got out of control, and then I was like, shit, I've got to deliver here now.
So we got some comments coming in from Megan, and Megan says, brilliant, loving hearing the story behind the 24-hour ride, and she absolutely loves your sense of adventure. And that's a good place to almost bring this to a close and open it up for questions from the bunch. Your sense of adventure is really evident. You know, from your BMX days, I know it wasn't the adventure to go to private school for you down in the city, but your adventure to get in the boat, go to the head of the river, get all that, and then get in a already established crew to go to your first Olympics games, and then go on and on and on, then get on the bike, then do some crazy stuff for charities like Tour de Cure, like 24 hours. Your sense of adventure, is that what's the real fuel here, mate?
Yeah, and I think the word I'd use is I like being up for the challenge, and I like the feeling of being out of my comfort zone. I've become used to that as a person. So the Awesome Foursome was about putting your hand up higher than anyone else, and the adventure was, could you be a part of this thing? I want to be a part of that. And so the enthusiasm, I've got an unusual sense of optimism. I've said to a lot of people, I seem to wake up the next day after a crappy day and sort of go, that doesn't matter. Like, it's actually, I can have a crack at something, I can try something, and give you an idea. So we live on the coast here, often massive swells, and you see the swells, building over a couple of days. And I just love getting out in the ocean, not necessarily being a great surfer, but I just love getting out in the ocean because you find out stuff about yourself. So sense of adventure, optimism, and the ability to sort of do it with one or two others who are crazy enough to go along with you. And so that what I've realised in life, it's a cliche, but life's just too short to not have a crack at stuff. And I don't mind failing. I love the idea of the mistakes and the scars you get emotionally or physically from things. And so endurance cycling, going out into the ocean, doing things like, having a crack at, 24 hours or rowing races is what it's all about. So that's why I always try to encourage, not only our kids, but also friends and family. And we've got a John Darcy who came across to Melbourne, and, we did a massive ride in Victoria, and he had no idea where we were going. And so it was just finding one other person that would actually be up for the idea of doing it with you. But we rode for what was 6 hours in torrential rain and storms, and we just kept smiling at each other. So I think you come to realise that once you start to do a few things like this, you realise what you're capable of. And so it is a sense of adventure, it's optimism, but it's also the realisation that, we're far more capable than people often give ourselves credit for, and others maybe outside as well.
So it's the unusual sense of optimism, I think, is going to be the ringing line from this particular chat, especially because we didn't get into your cricket and your cricket management, unusual sense of optimism going to Tasmanian cricket for a couple of years, an unusual sense of optimism going from Tasmanian cricket now to Cricket Australia as their GM for high performance. We didn't even get to that. So I think I've given everybody a bit of a chance to get ready for a question. Has anyone got a question from the bunch for Drew? Anywhere about his career, his life in cricket these days, the sense of optimism he has about his crappy sailing? Is there any questions for Drew that you'd like to sing out right now?
going to say, not sure about the 6 hours. I think it was more like 11 and a half from memory, but yeah, torrential rain for 6.
And which one of you stopped talking during it?
I went very quiet. I suffered that, Dave.
Yeah.
Brad Guy on their message would like to know how you're coping with COVID, mate. We know you're at your dad's place, and on behalf of the entire group, commiserations for your dear old dad who passed away 3 months ago after a battle with Parkinson's, and then at a very aggressive cancer took him. I know you're down there with the family during COVID, but how are you guys coping?
Yeah, look, I think probably it's like everyone. I think the isolation, the willingness or the want to connect to people is really, really important. I think being down on the farm, the benefit we've got here is we've got the freedom. We can go for a walk. We can get to the lake. We don't have to necessarily interact with people to run the risk of either getting sick or making others sick. So I found that difficult. But what I've also found is the indoor cycling numbers have gone through the roof. So, you know, I think I said to you yesterday, 40 minutes a day keeps the doctor away. And, you know, as long as I'm getting enough of the intensity of that bit of exercise, I don't care how I go on a Zwift race, I just love getting on. So I've found that having that as a routine has been great for my mental health. The ability to get outside, and it's not as easy to get outside when we're in the city and all that sort of stuff with the restrictions, particularly in Victoria, but just the ability to get outside and the ability to stay connected. So I find that every day, even though I've got a lot of work on, just ringing one friend and just having a 15, 20-minute conversation. So Rob Walker was the one I spoke to yesterday from my old rowing days, and we just connected, and I really enjoyed just having that conversation and just, you know, reminiscing about old times. And so COVID's a challenge, but it's sort of shown me that, you know, there's things that actually matter more, like family and friends, and it doesn't need to get in the way of enjoying that connection and relationship.
We've got a question from Ag. Will you attempt the 24-hour again at Brunswick, of course? Do you think you'll ever build up to do it again?
Yeah, hell yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give Jeff a call. Jeff's listening, by the way, so he'll probably give you a call at about 7:29.
Brunswick track has been resurfaced, so it'll be much better than this for 24 hours. Okay. I'd love to do a 24-hour again. I'd love to do it with some people. Yeah, can you arrange something, Duncan?
Yeah. Maybe it'll be a Telstra Connected TDC event.
There you go.
See, growing all the time. What an influential podcast this is. Question from Matt Liu. So Matt wants to know the influence of the head of the river. Was the head of the river a big influence on your own career? So the head of the river, it seems like a very, very significant stepping stone all the way through your career when you look at the school's head of the river, the King's head of the river, all that kind of stuff. So head of the river is a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, how do I put this in perspective? So as a year 9 student, arriving at a school that had, almost 2,000 students, so you completely felt at sea and overwhelmed, going to head of the river at the end of term 1 in that first year as a young kid, not even involved in the sport, standing on the bank and all the schools chanting and cheering, and that's on the school side, and then all the parents and old students on the other side. And I was just blown away by how big the sporting event was for school level, and sadly, because it's a sport that largely relates to private school, and it's partly because of funding, it's unfortunate. But that got my attention. I think racing at head of the river in my final year of school in particular was just, that big long build up and being able to really perform sort of gave me confidence as a young kid. But being a part of something with my team and my crewmates, I just remember vividly being given the instruction, which was Drew, just follow Sean. And Sean Evans was the guy sitting in front of me, and it was just like, Drew, all you got to do is just follow Sean. You just got to do the 7-seat job and just follow Sean. And in my head, it was always the reminder of what James and Laurie had always said, which was process equals outcome. And so for me, it was just like, follow him, stay long, follow him, stay long. Don't row too hard, just stay long and follow him. And so that was the realization, was that amongst all that pressure of a big school event, by just sticking to the process and a couple of simple reminders, and you get a result, you start to believe that that's the way to do it.
Fantastic. Now I've got a couple of shout outs here. Great to have a fellow Gippslander join us this morning. That's from Loretta Willerton. Thanks for sharing your story, Drew. And one from John Darcy, a serious one this time. So strap yourself in. Have the cricketing fraternity accepted you?
Oh, that's a good question.
Good
I'm
question.
maybe not the person. I'm not the person to ask. I think I'm respected because of what I've done in rowing, but I'm not respected because I know anything about the sport of cricket. and I think
how do you get around that? How do you get over that? How do you get over that fact that, okay, I'm at the shallow end of knowledge here or ability in the sport that I'm having, because, you know, elite performance or high level performance or high performance where you are, the executive director, that's more of a, you know, a holistic high and then granular, bringing it together with the experts. So you've got subject matter experts to bring it together and strap it in for you while you steer the ship. I get that. But how do you personally go with being in a group that everyone just doesn't go, ooh, when you walk into a room as one of our legendary cricketers would?
Well, I mean, the first thing you're confronted by is the language is so different. Like, and every sport has its own language, every industry has its own language. But what I found in cricket was there was just a nuance to the technicality of the sport that I knew it was technical, but you know, the way they described the ball being bowled or the batter or the fielding set and the field placements and the movements and all that stuff, I was just like, well, that's just going straight over my head. So I didn't even try to get into understanding that or trying to bluff my way through. But what I did have was a real interest in understanding probably a simple level of information that I could get my head around, and then looking for the principles that were similar to rowing. And so then what I'd do is I'd have one-on-one conversations at Cricket Tasmania and also at Cricket Australia Now, where I'd sort of say to someone, look, just walk me through that so I can actually get my head around that. And then once I found a connection to what either rowing was or cycling was or some other activity, I went, okay, I can see what they're doing there. The nuance of what it looks like on the surface is different. So for me, it was about not trying to bluff my way through, but just acknowledging that I didn't know. I remember sitting in a coaching meeting in Tasmania one day and saying, I just had no idea what you said for the last 30 minutes. And the assistant coach laughed and he turned around, Jeff Braun, he said, mate, well, we really appreciate you acknowledging that you don't know and you're not even trying to be a part of the conversation, you're just absorbing it. But the other part I found that's worked really well in rowing, and I like doing anyway, is anything that I saw anyone do it's great. And that's not just on field, it's off field, you know, and just advocating for that. And so being able to advocate for others has meant that I can have an influence that is bringing people on the journey rather than sort of trying to go, I've got the vision and I've got the technical knowledge, so therefore I'm taking you there. So, and out of my comfort zone again. Like I'm in a sport I don't get. Like I don't get it. I didn't really play it. Backyard cricket, ball whizzing past your ears was about all I experienced. So I'm never going to be understanding what's happening out in the field there. But for me, I love the passion that the people have for the sport and enjoy helping them, you know, improve the sport, make the sport better from a physical performance side of things.
Just a quick one on that. Do you ever kind of get the pads in just to get the experience? Are you one of those guys who needs the experience of the ball whizzing past your head in the nets, or the ball machine just giving it to you and you're just standing there quietly in the dark with no one watching, balls just coming at you trying to bat? You don't delve into that sort of experience factor?
I haven't. Nah, I've thought about it. And it has crossed my mind, but I've found myself numerous times sort of going, you know what, it's got to be okay to not necessarily have to have the physical experience. And I think the sport now, cricket right now, I think what's really enjoyable about it is others have paved the way for someone like me to get an opportunity to come in and be a bit more accepted because they've broken the back of that. And I think more sports are doing this now where they're looking for people from other sports and other industries to come in and bring those other knowledges. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so a couple of shout outs. Thanks very much for sharing your story, Drew. Another great session. Thank you from Kylie Payton. Thank you, Kylie. And this is going to be the last question, then we're going to wrap up with our voice from the bunch. What's your next? If someone wants to know what's your next challenge, what are you looking forward to next? He loves your optimism, but what are you looking forward to next, Drew?
Next physical challenge, I'm planning once isolation stops, I'm going to head to Tasmania and I'm going to ride around Tasmania as quick as I can. Yep, okay. Do a lap. And Darth knows this. We've talked about this for 12 months, and my daughter's moved down. She's now doing university at Hobart University of Tasmania Fine Arts, and so I'm going to say to the family, I'm going down to see her, and then I'll take the bike and I'll start south and I'll head up the west coast and around the top and come around. And if there's anyone that wants to go with me, I'd love it.
Well,
if anyone knows topography of Tassie, it's a terrible idea. Perfect for Drew.
Perfect. So you need your unusual sense of optimism for sure. Hey, listen, question about family, Drew. Kaya and Jasper, are you getting them into rowing? Are they into rowing?
my daughter Kyra is 19 now, so she tried it in year 8 at school and did it for a year and loved it at the start. And the kids really, and it's part of the thing of influence as well. She fell out of love of the sport very quickly. My son's doing it, trying it. He's just very much at the start, so he's year 9, 15 years of age. He loves his surfing. She loves her art. He's into his gardening as well. Like he has plants here and garden stuff that he's got and all that sort of stuff is just extraordinary. So I just love that they've got their own passions, but they're both tall. So every time they meet someone, they've always got the comment being made to them, which is, oh, you should give rowing a go. They've both tried it. They've both been on the ergo. We'll see where it lands with my son, but certainly for my daughter, she's got other interests, that's for sure.
And how do you go as a parent with that? Because you're driven, you've had success. So what kind of a parent were you when your kids were in rowing and then deciding not to row? How'd you go with that?
I'm pretty good. For example, we haven't sent my son to the same school I went to, just purely for the fact that we didn't want the comparisons and all that sort of stuff. And so even for my daughter, the same thing. Just because they've got a dad who's done rowing doesn't mean they should row. Just because they've got a dad who's done sport doesn't mean they should do sport in terms of competitiveness. I just like them being active. As long as they're physically active, as long as they've got their passions, I'm comfortable with that. And so the other one for me is I get obsessive, and I know that there's a positive to that, but there's also the downside of that. And so I've just tried to show them that there's importance about having balance and maybe chasing after your sporting aspirations. If that's really what you want to do, great. But if it's not really your thing, you're doing it for other reasons, for family or whatever it is, and that's not the healthy reason. So I never wanted that for them, and always sort of tried to stay away to let them just choose for themselves and see where they find their own path.
Fantastic. Well, it's been fascinating, mate. We've ticked over the hour. It's felt like 5 minutes. And now we've got John Darcy, the voice of the punch, to give a vote of thanks. John?
Thanks to Duncan, Anna and Sandy and the crew for putting this together as usual. An unbelievable job, Dunk. Drew, you've been a great influence on me when you spent your time down in Tassie. You're just an unbelievable person. Cricket Australia is so lucky to have you. One of my goals in life is actually to poach you from Cricket Australia into Telstra. So hopefully that comes to fruition one day. And I really look forward to being a nutcase like you and maybe doing that lap around Tassie sometime. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay connected.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks,
appreciate
John.
it.
Appreciate it. Okay, so process equals outcome and having an unusual sense of optimism are two big takeaways, mate. So thank you so much. We've learned so much. And you've shared so deeply, and we really appreciate it on Telstra Connected Cycling and podcast. We'll be all following your next moves avidly.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dunks.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for coming along for your ride. We'll see you next week.